And good evening. We are now live from Helsinki and around the world. We're going to be talking tonight to some very special guests from different countries, not just from Finland tonight. And I'm going to unmute you all as we start talking, because the idea of tonight is not for me to talk or do the usual Estève show of writing and doodling and utterly confusing you with my videos. The idea is to actually have Maria, Ashish, Dennis, and Tuomo here tonight to actually share their insights about what it was like to take a little sneak peek down the rabbit hole of personal growth on communication behaviors with the periodic table, which some of you have seen in the YouTube channel. And the idea behind this session was really to sort of cut the whole quite often shallow online conversations that happen between people that are, because they're just on show, they're in a podcast with somebody very special. They want to go like, I'm talking to Tony Robbins, I have to look super good. And the whole idea is that we're kind of interested in researching authentic human connection across different boundaries and divides, whether they're age, gender, culture, mother tongue not being English, whatever, it doesn't matter. All the divides that we can make up. I think we believe there's a whole way that we can bridge that by just solid communication practices. And so that's why we're measuring things. And Maria, Ashish, Dennis, and Tuomo have actually gone through pretty interesting little introspective journey by measuring their behaviors in the point of view of communication with a 1 hour long kind of questionnaire assessment that looks a bit like personality tests, but it's got nothing to do with personality. It's behavior based. And then they had some videos of me talking through their data dashboard, which they received in an email. And the result of which is that maybe there were some new thoughts, new insights, new questions around their own personal development. And, I'll let you speak, Maria and Ashish and Dennis and Tuomo, in a second about who you are. But clearly, you all have done a lot of personal growth. So you're not just coming into this with a clear canvas. You've already done a lot of thinking before about where you are, who you are, what's your job, what's your positioning, your ethics in the world, your values, all these kind of topics are probably there. What else this has brought, we're going to unfold in 3 rounds of conversation. So I'm using this kind of format of conversation called, I know some people might check up on this and find that it's not true, the Viking checking. It's really just 3 rounds of questions. I don't really know if it comes from the Vikings, but I've heard a story that this was the way that they would build trust after having done some raids. But what we're going to do is do a round 1, a round 2, and a round 3 of questions. And I'll prompt you, don't worry, as you go along, I'll remind you. The first one is really just about, it's a check-in where I'm going to share with you 4 levels of thinking, because we often jump straight into results. But, you can think about communication on a mundo level, on a macro level, on a meso level, or on a micro level. They're all very different, and we don't have the same conversations. So we're going to do a calibration checking, which will be these 4 levels. In other words, like I'm going to ask each one of you to come in and say, like, at what level of thinking are you interested in even talking about this topic? It's such a vast field. Second one is your challenge or insight. So it's the question on your mind about your own communication, behavior growth, whatever it is your journey is, and challenge or insight. If you don't have a challenge, it might just be an insight you got from doing this. And then the third one is a toast, gratitude about something or somebody or some idea, some book, I don't know, something you'd like to share with others that you think is valuable. So that's the format of tonight, dear friends. And so that we go through this in a very fluid way, I'm going to invite you the O rule. when we speak, so that instead of me always interrupting, or sometimes I might, but so that we don't interrupt each other and that we have a fluid conversation. Talking piece will be a bit like using "o." "O" means I have spoken, os, or I say "o," and then "os" or "o" is fine, and the others in sync reply "o" in a way that says, I have heard you and acknowledge that the piece for talking is now somebody else. It's kind of an elegant way of doing a non-verbal talking piece without having the barrier of passing a stick. So if you're game with that, I'm going to start using this at the moment. I will break the rule because I'm hosting, but I hope that you will all in sync say "o," os.
Oh,
Boss.
Okay, so who would like to go first on the question? The question, I'm going to give you 2 seconds to think about it, as your check-in is this. Mundo level is you in the world. Like, I did a bit of background check on you. I stalked you online, if you like. But that's basically your social media channels. It's who you are in social media. It could be your personal social media, or it could be your corporate one if you're working with PR or communications online. So that's talking at the level of social media and public domain. If you're publishing books or academic journals, that's also the Mundo level. Macro is like investor negotiations, corporate governance, inter partnerships between business and government. This kind of conversations, kind of official, also traceable, but not the same as this. So it could be, for example, board like Tuomo is obviously very, very active in this level. And then meso level is your daily ops. It's you and your close collaboration, your team, who you're working with at the moment, like your everyday colleagues, the ones you speak to most often on Slack. And micro is in your head. And we deliberately have micro in our head, not micro one-on-one, because actually it's so much more important what's going on inside your head. In other words, the assumptions, the limiting beliefs, the whatever you're doing on a micro level inside your head to interpret and construe reality is fundamental to how you communicate on the other levels. So those are the 4 levels. Now, you're going to have to pick one for today as your check-in. And as you check in with which level you're most interested today to talk about this is maybe you could also introduce yourselves by saying why you even did this in the first place. So who would like to go first? Please take the stick. It's in my hand. You can take it virtually. And
all right. I will start. I think the level that I would like to start with is actually on the micro level. And I think the reason this is because the way you perceive things, it's really the root of everything, is what will affect how you interact with your colleagues. It'll affect how you're acting with the board, and it'll also affect with how you're, talking externally to the larger audiences. So I think whenever I look at communication, of course, like you look at the greater world, but I do think a lot of it is about internal dialogue, about how when you see a conflict, when you see an action, how you interpret it, and the other person might be perceiving a completely different situation. And it's very interesting to me to see how far, when you start actually like micro analyzing specific conversations or conflicts, like how much of it is actually going on in the head of the receiver. And for that reason, that's my choice.
was that us? As you can see, by the way, I'm just interrupting you a second because I noticed that in the chat, I just wanted to greet everybody. Usually I greet the chat at the beginning. I just maybe a bit rude if I don't, but welcome to those of you in the chat. If you do want to be identified and ask questions and interact with us, please do say hi in the chat. In whichever channel you're in, it should pop up in our side here. So who's next?
Hi, I'm Ashish. I'll go next, Steve. All right, everybody. Good morning and good evening in whichever part of the world you are. I'm so happy and honored to be with this esteemed panel of my colleagues here, and really looking forward to a great free flow communication with you all. To answer to Steve's question, I would take a mix of macro and meso. Uh, Macro in the sense, since I'm working in a US MNC, General Mills, we have a global operations. In India, we have global supply chain office, so we interact with our colleagues in United States, Canada, Mexico, Europe, as well as uh, Southeast Asia. And on a day-to-day basis, we work directly with the teams and also with the virtual teams. And with post-COVID era, this is one area where everybody is working upon is the hybrid working model. So for me and my team, we come once a week to office, and rest of the days it's work from home. And the challenge is bringing everybody to office even on that one day of the week. So that is one thing. Secondly, with a lot of virtual meetings, it's difficult to gauge the vibes and interpersonal relations through non-verbal communications cues. So, as we are in this migration world, pre-COVID and post-COVID, in the new normal ways of working, uh, I am here with you to share my insights and also to learn from everybody. Us.
Us. So we still have some practicing. I'm gonna give you the credit of having done the us in sync, but it's the time lag that's doing the thing that's not syncing, because it's always a good excuse to blame it on the tech. Who's next?
I can go next. So yes, hello, I'm Maria, and I think it might be the meso, micro, macro even. Let's see what I'm talking about. Well, I have known Estève and Anu for a long time, and when they started speaking about this new software app, I got very interested and wanted to try it out to see what it's like, and got the opportunity to do that. And I haven't worked that much. I have worked with myself ever since, the 35 years or so, but not with the communication as such. So it was very interesting to see how I communicate in a team or inside my head, because this is where it starts actually. So I clearly saw that not to make I can't know what somebody else is thinking or feeling or what is going on in their head, but I assume so much that I know, and so it gets me fast. I'm a fast thinker, and maybe I should be slower, and that is really what I took away from it, and yeah, was.
Us.
Us.
So thank you, Maria. So Tuomo, same thing. Like, what was the sort of angle that got you, interested in this? And perhaps today, like, it seems that we have a trend with micro. I'm not sure if it fits with what you're about to say, but what about you?
Yeah, I'm thinking bigger. I'm considering the macro Mando level. As mentioned, Steve, thank you. So my name is Tuomo, and I'm a currently board professional. I'm working in several other businesses, also in medical business. And my background is in sales, business development, angel investing, and board membership. So helping companies to grow one way or another. And in sales part and making the organizations, I have created established organizations to up to 150 people. There were people who were grasping my ideas very fast. I like to compress things, make it quick. A little bit like Maria said, that she's a very fast communicator and wants to get things done, grasp it. But then there are these people that, from my perspective, are very slow, very sort of should I say, stubborn, and they are not so easy to adapt. And I have had very much problems and difficulties more of internally inside myself, that how can I convince them? How should I adapt my communications so that I would be understood as well as I would understand them? So in that sense, I'm working on a macro and mundo level, that I'm working with the organization development, but also connecting those to the world, and big trends of the global trends, and understanding the world from that perspective. Of course, there needs to be the micro level, but as some say, I paint with the big brush and concentrate on the big parts, and that is something that I need to develop, that I need to understand also the details, be able to communicate and bring my communication on the level that is sufficient and adequate and suitable to the other one who I'm speaking with. Us.
So now we can jump in. Basically, I was going to actually give you a navigation of the levels of conversation, because we all talk about things like small talk, dialogue, discussion. We use these words interchangeably as if they were of the same nature. But actually, what I mean here, just for today's conversation, when I use the word small talk, discussion, negotiation, or co-creation, and I know this is too small for you to read, but I'll zoom in a second. It's just like small talk is what you see when you go to the bakery, or when you start a podcast and you just say hi and it's all nice to see you. And I could have spent a little bit more time praising all of you wonderful's background, for example, to do small talk. But then debate and discussion is where we start talking about truth and right and wrong, which is very common in business and politics and science. But it generally is the place where people have the least collective intelligence, because it's mostly people as experts having an argumentative conversation, which is useful. But beyond that barrier, there's another level of depth of unlocking of conversation, which in MIT, Otto Scharmer talks about as being deeper collective intelligence happens around dialogue, and then stage 4 co-creation. So this is a summary of his Theory U book, which is really good for management. It's actually, he writes, it's quite interesting because he writes at all the levels. He writes about the mundo impact of this thinking, meaning corporate global governance. He talks about it on the macro level of corporate governance and inter-organizational collaboration. He talks about it on the level of teams and the level of internal leadership of yourself. So it's kind of a very holistic approach to these topics without trying to make this. So that's basically what we're looking at today, is that I'd like to take you down through small talk. We've already done that. I've made you already feel like you've done enough small talk, I'm sure. But debate and discussion, and we could have a discussion about topics, but it's not necessarily welcome with personal growth, because it opens up judgments. And the last thing we want is to judge each other's personal growth, because it becomes very potentially awkward when we don't even know each other that well. So let's go straight into dialogue, where the simple rule is that we suspend judgment and cynicism for just opening up to what the other is sharing. And each one would share the second round, which is the question, the challenge, the insight, if you like, on your mind. It's this one here. So it's basically, we can do this one at a time, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. I might interrupt if we go into a tangent, but we could pick one of you, like, for example, Ashish or whoever wants to go first, would say like, this is the thing that at the moment, after having done the scan, and I'm not going to show your data because it's private and confidential, but you can share whatever you feel like sharing from that. You go like, okay, I saw this, I didn't understand it, and my challenge is, this is really important to me, help me understand it. Or it could be, I had this insight and it's helped me to rethink the way I'm going to approach people, whatever it is, but something that you'd like to share from this exercise that you did with the videos plus the scan plus the dashboard. So I'm giving you deliberately a little bit of time to think by explaining this again and again. So who would like to go first? And then I'm going to react to that with a bit of maybe drawing and conversational, maybe to make it more tangible as well, Maria. Who'd like to go first?
I can go first.
Thank you, Maria.
Yes, challenge. When I looked at the data and that I had, there were two things that stood out there, and that was to check assumptions, and then there was also the elephant in the room. And correct me if I understood the elephant in the room wrong, but an elephant in the room is something that nobody is talking about, that is a really, really big issue that might possibly destroy the whole project. Is that correct? Then so if you're lifting up the elephant in the room, then are you the devil's advocate then, or what are you? But I have often felt that I have been the person doing that, and that's a challenge to because I cannot not do it, because if nobody's doing it, then I can see the project or the thing like going down like Titanic, like this, blah, 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 blah. And that's not good. So I would like to be nicer about how I address the elephant, but I don't know if is it even possible to be nicer towards an elephant. Os.
I deliberately just left that silence, you noticed, Maria, because what I was doing here is showing you how powerful this little tiny rule that we have is. That as a Frenchman, I would have already jumped in if I didn't have the rule of Os. I would have jumped in immediately to avoid that, what in the Latin cultures would be labeled as an awkward silence. But I actually loved it because it gave you space to think. And then you continued, and then you went to another. So you were basically doing what the majority of the planet needs to do more, is talk to think, which is why people need to be able to listen without paying too much judgment of what is being said, because talking to think is a form of self-care, actually. So in that way, thank you for playing along with the rule of Os and leaving that unfolding. Of course, I can react to that as well. I think you'd probably welcome me answering that question as well as just commenting on it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, for the viewers, I'm assuming that those who are viewing have watched the Green, Blue, Red and know about the Green, Blue, Red. I know that Dennis is a previous Jedi from another company who's been through the whole long process. But I'm going to quickly doodle something to do with the three colors, because I noted 4 themes in your data. One is green, one is blue, one is red, and one is conflicts. And they're actually all intertwined. So I'm going to just quickly draw this up for you so that I can actually answer what you were thinking, because there's a clear pattern around elephant in the room is actually the reason why we called the green elephant. So I don't know if you did that on purpose, but it's a nice, thank you for choosing that one. It makes it easier for me to segue to what we're doing. But you talked about, in a way, when we use the technique elephant, which is in the periodic table, it's a green verbal. So if this is, I'm going to draw this quickly. When you talk if you look at communication between two people, and you focus on the process of conversation instead of the actual content. So paying attention to where the focus is. If you're focusing on others, it's what we would call talking green. So the anchor would obviously be, in this case, Maria. If I'm talking about you, Maria, just to give this tangibility. So if you are Maria and you're looking at it from the point of view of yourself, then anything that is blue is what belongs to you. So when you're fast, you got a lot of blue. Your focus is often on yourself, and therefore you have a lot of ideas of, for example, judgments or assessments of a person or situation. For example, when you might be even thinking ahead of what they're about to say next, those are generally blue. It belongs to you. Green is actually what belongs to the other. So that usually in a live conversation is what they actually say. Now, one way of doing that is you look at it at 3 levels. There's the verbal level, which is what you say. There's the non-verbal, which is, for example, the timing at which you say it, the speed at which you say it, or even the silences, because the silence speaks as much as words, as we know. And then there's the intentions. And you can color code all 3 levels, which is obviously the periodic table structure. If you look at the whole structure of the periodic table, it's just basically a map of this with the mental models, which is the micro level. So here, verbal technique, green, a great example is a green elephant. So why does green even help is because in this case, you're saving a lot of time. I think of green as a time saver. So elephant is, if you use it at the time that is to the collective benefit, actually being a devil's advocate is very welcome. I'll give you an example. You're running a project with 5 different companies. They're all different budgets. if nobody's done an alignment between these budgets and calendars, the obvious thing to do for any project manager, and it's happening to still go forward, you're quite likely going to get some budget overruns and some very dissatisfied team members. So in that case, the devil's advocate is a very positive thing that's very welcomable. If you don't have a host, you can also voice it yourself by saying, you know, humor is one of the best strategies to distance from ego. And so if you are devil's advocate by default reaction, that's a gift. So you can joke about that being your gift. You can say like, okay, many of you don't like it when somebody voices an assumption that nobody's necessarily talking about, but I'm the one who usually gets that role. A bit of love to yourself. And then you suddenly go, well, I'm just asking this tricky, has anybody considered that? And then you voice the elephant. And suddenly you're using humor to both position yourself as a humble, you know, person who can laugh at their own role, because there's nothing wrong with the devil's advocate if they're at the beginning. The problem is when they come at the end of a meeting, and it's then, you know, more challenging to have that. So basically, one element is it can be a gift. Being who you are, whatever that role is, if you understand how it helps the collective intelligence, in this case, saving money and time and effort is a great benefit for the collective. So you can voice that as a positive for everybody. Does that make sense? Or am I just being too abstract here?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right with what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. And doing that with not being so serious about it, but more like with a bit of humor is helping a lot. That's really good.
So are we ready to move on? Would you like to explore that question together? Would you like to invite some conversation about that? Or are you satisfied with that and that we move on to another investigation or another topic that came out from one of the
I think we can move on and come back later if time allows. So, Os.
Thank you. Os. Who would like to go next? And this is, again, I'm just going to reiterate the questions because it's not on the screen. So just to make it top of mind, the question on your mind about yourself, and if you're willing to share like the insights that go with it. And if you want some reflection from me like this, I can talk less and just have you more talking out loud to think as well. So take your time if you want, is what I mean. Who'd like to go next?
I can go next. I think we...
Oh, sorry, Dennis. Please go.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. So I think that one of my strong ego hats was to be kind of the host and the harvester, which is both kind of roles that I tend to take in meetings. I normally am a very active participant in a meeting, and if I don't, it quickly means that I disengage in some form or another, and that might be a variety of reasons. Either I don't feel like my contribution is valued or useful, or I have other things going on, like another business problem that is a lot more urgent than this meeting, and I actually kind of want to leave. So, or and so on. But like, anyways, focusing on when I am engaged as this host and harvester, I think there's a bit of a conflict there actually, because I like to both manage a meeting and be taking the notes and the outcomes, and it's a bit of a conflicting role, because like you need to well, you need to be focused on doing either or, and I think it would be interesting to kind of explore how that would work, because what I notice in as a repeated pattern is that like whenever we drive decisions, either we have the meeting where a lot is discussed and little comes out of it, like so no documented action items and things like that, or we focus a lot on documenting the meeting, but maybe the discussion wasn't as deep, and the decisions that are documented and come out of it don't stick in the larger organization as they hit the next level of approvals and so on. Os.
Os. Thank you, Dennis. I wanted to try a different way of opening this up than the first one that we did with Maria, because I'm not sure if me taking a doodle pad and drawing things up that can be done on videos is necessarily as useful. I think maybe I could use the time better by just voicing out my thoughts. And if you don't understand, we can just have it as a conversation, Dennis. I looked at your data just as you were talking. Do you mind me mentioning your data, even though I'm not going to show it?
It's fine. Yeah.
So basically, chaotic balance in a nutshell is having the balance between the necessary chaos of emergent good thinking. So in other words, not ego projections and people's ready-made prepackaged thinking, but real thinking. And that chaos is what we want to harvest. And then the process, which is like, how do we get through that? What's the time bucketing? What's the tool? What's the channel? Is the hosting part. So in fact, the two roles are they're not separated for the fact that they need to be, because it's less cognitive bandwidth for one person only, which is what you were doing when we were working together on this. But it's also because it's a very different focus. The harvester is really looking at making sure what's coming out is redistributed, which is already a job in its own. Because if you think of knowledge management, as you know, working from the big companies where you are, it's not a matter of just recording, transcribing, and resharing, because that's just noise. It's about filtering, synthesizing. And that is a job in itself, which is seldom done well, particularly on topics of learning, particularly topics of growth, things like how do we improve our operations, or rather than just the KPIs. So that's one thing. And if I look at your data, the two where you need most chaotic balance, in other words, your lower scores on the touch points that would probably help you most, are the actual two that you said about hosting and harvesting. Learning, two, and learning is about harvesting. So in other words, collective learning is more than me learning for myself, but learning, for example, I see organizations do a great internal newsletter, LinkedIn posts, whatever. Collective learning through some organized process that goes beyond in-meeting harvesting is one area from your data that I noticed being like, that's basically harvesting. And then the goals, direction, purpose, why we do what we do, how we work on what needs to be done, that sort of operation. Okay, how are we going to spend our carefully planned time budget? In other words, when you have 6 experts in a room with X number of minutes, they all have a charge rate. I think Maria can concur with I should probably even have a number in your head if I say like how much a lawyer is worth in an hour versus a technical construction worker or hairdresser, or each one has an own, clock per minute. And that basically is your host's job, is to make sure that you're using that budget live well. The main question is, where do you believe you need to manage your time budget of collective intelligence best? Is it, because it's often not useful to do it in all touch points, but there's some critical ones, like for example, board meetings, or moments when you are bringing a lot of expensive experts together in a very high chaotic environment, like a creative workshop, kickoff workshop. What are those touch points? I think the index for you might be around learning and goal setting. So I don't know where you do those things. Where do you do collective learning is in your work, and where do you do collective goal setting? Those are the two where you might just want to focus your 80-20 of effort on hosting and harvesting, to not try and do it everywhere. Because what I heard beneath what you said is that I'm wondering whether how should I do it? Where should I do it more or less? Or did I understand this wrong?
Yeah, well, I think it is about basically having like high stakes kind of decisions. Like we can say at board meetings, it's a bit different in large organizations, like meetings that have cross department kind of impact and trying to get to negotiate dependencies and so on. So trying to figure out how to come up with a decision that kind of gets stakeholders from very different departments and with very different motivations aligned, and not just within the meeting, but within something that sticks beyond this meetings. Because I don't know if this is a common thing, but a theme that's been going on in the last months is that we come to very positive conclusions at the end of our meetings, and then we document the outcomes, and then when it comes to the reality of actually implementing it or prioritizing these efforts against other things, then these decisions don't stick. And that's what I find an interesting communications challenge, to get not just the single yes, but the true yes, and the commitment, and the organization's commitment. Us.
So then basically I would invite you to go and read the original works of D. Hock, because D. Hock was the guy who created a very functional business. If you've not read it already, I think it's worth a read. D. Hock is founder of Visa Corporation. So financially, he's pretty sound guy. He's not too woo-woo, and he's very, very feet on earth. Created a massive business infrastructure called Visa, inspired by nature because of the chaotic balance. His book was called Birth of the Chaotic Age or something like that. And it was his basic autobiography. Key message that you're asking yourself about commitment is down to the degree of shared purpose that's meaningful beyond profit. So a nice question to ask people when you meet them in a small talk to get it a bit deeper is like, beyond profits and KPIs, what's driving you in the mornings? What's getting you up out of bed? The meaningful layer, which can link to spirituality, can open up very tricky topics. In my opinion, most people don't ask that because they're afraid of talking about religion. But actually, it's quite a healthy way to connect with people and go like, really, what's driving you? Not just the profit, like what's your passion, that kind of ikigai level. And so in a meeting, it's the same thing. If you don't have much of that, if it's all functional to-dos, which is often in corporate world, like, it's not welcome to start talking about meaningful purpose because it's so diluted across the whole corporate lines that it's more about just like getting things done. So that's where you then have a lack of that purpose connection, which you get in startups, for example, who are like highly driven by their social enterprise mission, and they have t-shirts printed. I don't know how much it is now because you've been in both environments. You've worked, dare I say, you were part of the initial Tesla team, or you did, at least in your LinkedIn bio, you do talk about being part of. So you've been in both the corporate and that. So I'm wondering what you found when you compared those two. Is it to do with that, or?
I think it is. And I think that's what's making this current situation so interesting for me, because most of my career I've spent in really high purpose organizations. And like you said, Tesla, we had like 4 or 5 months to build a prototype, and the outcome was either kind of probably a bankrupt organization or funding of many hundreds of millions of dollars. So and after that too, different startups and different teams where we're building new teams, and we had this mission of everyone knowing how they come together, and that's the interesting challenge that I'm going to at my current work environment, is where we had a department that for many years, 10 almost 20 years, was working independently and had a single purpose that everyone in the department was aligned with, and we got merged with a new department, and all of a sudden, instead of having a single vision, you have the history of our department, and you have the history of the other department, and you have kind of this, like, a certain amount of pride. You have people wanting their products and their ideas to live on, when it's quite clear that like only one of two can continue to live on because they have very similar functions. And what's interesting is then this environment of shared purpose is not given anymore, and through this it creates very interesting dynamics, and it's very also adding to that. We've already, I think, mentioned you cannot have a talk now post-COVID times and so on, that we are all distributed across the world. We are not meeting in person, the ones that are here in Europe, so frequently that we can break these boundaries so easily. So you end up having to do a lot of one-on-ones and negotiations in order to figure out, like, yes, what is driving people, what is doing this and making things stick. Yeah, awesome.
Os. Thank you, Dennis. And I'm just inviting the next person now. I think there's been some. We can go back in circles on these topics, and I can open up the doodle board again and start doing some mentoring online. But I think the most important is to hear what you have to say while opening that box, that metaphorical box of the satellite scan. Like you're looking at a mirror of 8 different lenses. There's lots of topics. I'm itching. I think Anu is going to tell me off if I start doodling more now, but I'm itching to draw something around conflicts because the topic underlying all of this is in negotiation, Dennis. Because that's one of the challenging situations for you. And in conflicts, Maria, Ashish, and Tuomo, who those were your situation that were the most challenging, there's a common red thread, which is actually the commitment and the taking responsibility, which is linked to the purpose. Like, I'm not going to commit to something I don't believe in. That's basically a short way of saying it. Other than through my direct work accountabilities. So personal engagement versus the corporate ego. That's kind of a theme that also points back to conflicts. But before I go any further in that topic, Ashish or Tuomo, who would like to go next?
Yes, Steve, I would like to go next. Okay, so first of all, the satellite scan, I took it for the first time, and let me tell you, Estève, it's a wonderful tool. Green Elephant has done a wonderful job with that. And the reason why I mention that is that you've taken a 360 degrees perspective. A single question or a single assessment is taken from different angles so that at the end of the test, a true picture of the individual comes across. So, hats off to Green Elephant for building such a free flow and easy to use tool. Yeah. One of the roles that came across to me, and I do agree to that, is one of being a harvester, the presenter, and also audience, a participant. The reason is since I manage a supply planning team for global planning within India, so I need to lead the team of supply planning professionals within India. And that is where my role as the presenter and the harvester is concerned. But also, I get into a lot of meetings which are cross functional. Also, with virtual international teams. So at that time, I also need to be a audience, patient listener, and taking inputs. One challenge, Steve, I faced is with all these international virtual teams as well as working within the organization. One challenge that we face constantly is the unconscious bias. And
Mm.
the unconscious bias is an inclination to judge without question. It's nothing good or bad. It's an automatic response from our brain in which we take information and make a quick judgment about it. Now let's extrapolate to a team setting or international virtual team setting. uh, when we meet others, the dynamics of the group introduces a new type of cognitive bias in addition to each person's own biases. So, it is effectively expanding the opportunities for bias in these situations. So, it makes more complex, especially in this virtual and this hybrid and work from home environment. Let me give you an example. Uh, just imagine a CEO, a question to the audience, a question to everybody. If I am asked that question, the first thing that will come to my mind is a male, correct? A male who is more than 6 feet high, well built, and probably a white male. So this is a unconscious bias that we have come across through our conditioning, through advertisements, that this is a definition of CEO. But no, it's not correct. So that is one challenge that I constantly face. The unconscious bias is nothing good and bad about it, but it's all about how we are recognizing it and working through that, especially with cross-cultural teams. Us.
Awesome.
Us. I just wanted to invite, just to get your consent, Ashish. Would you welcome any comments from the others on this? I just wanted to open up that possibility because of its breadth of cross-cultural. We are a cross elephant in the room. We are a group of cross-cultural people here. Would you be willing to hear like some just like comments about this without it being judgments, actually, just to see what happens? And I would
Absolutely.
like to use this just as an opportunity to respond. Anybody?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ashish. Does anybody have a sort of reaction to that? Not a judgment, but a sort of yes, and I've noticed this kind of insight. Or should I just go on to a meta reflection of what you? Because I have something that could help you, Ashish. But does anybody want to react to what Ashish said?
I would like to give it a try. So I think one of the interesting situations that I've been going through more in my private life, not in my professional life, is that I'm a white male American and so on, with all the privileges that it tends to come to. But I am actually not living in, let's say, in this environment. I'm living in a European city now for 12 years, and same with my wife. We both basically emigrated internationally, and for the last 10 years or so, we've kind of lived in this bubble of being mostly, like, let's say 90% around similar international people with the same backgrounds as us. And now that we have a child and we're kind of breaking out of this bubble, having to, let's say, have contact with our local community, we're seeing a lot of things that I never experienced before, which is these kind of unconscious biases where I can tell that people are kind of let's say thrown off or hesitant, resistive, and so on, simply because of like who I am, where I come from, and it is a very eye-opening thing for me, as you know, never having really experienced this. So it's very yeah, it is very interesting. So I can empathize with you. I can see that this sneaks in faster than you see, and like what I realize also, if I think about it, like there are conflicts that are happening, and the people that are causing the conflict, they're not really aware of it. They're not doing it out of bad intention. It's just, let's say, natural, like instinctive behaviors that they're falling back to for lack of awareness or many other reasons, but not malicious reasons. Us.
Ashish, I think there's something here about value rules. Okay, this works whether you're in a matrix organization, like, you know, big corporate setups with lines of accountability horizontally and vertically, like it is in probably General Mills and in other companies that you've all known. It's very hard to do this, okay, disclaimer. But normally the sort of hack to deal with what you're doing is a local group of people who just decide, basically, if you're running an online session, somebody's hosting, not just the technicals, but there's somebody who's set an agenda. That person can also decide to use value rules in any format, whether it's a one CEO talk to many, or like us having a 5-person conversation. So it doesn't matter. There's always a legitimacy to propose a rule of behavior. The UN does it for interstate debates. Why not do it in corporate governance? It's very common, actually, in some organizations which are called teal organizations, holacracies, those new breed of organizations that have an evolutionary purpose at the fore, not a financial profit purpose. There's a whole, you know, best example is probably Buurtzorg in Holland, a nursing company that went very successful because of the way they run their organization. One of the things they do is they use value rules. So, for example, a value could be, let's say, humility. Let's use a very triggering one. Humility, because in Finland there's a general sense of humility in the culture. People like to think they're humble. So let's say the value of humility is built into the DNA of a company. Like, I don't know General Mills values, but you could probably quickly find them in a PowerPoint somewhere and say, okay, what are those 5 values of General Mills? And then you take each one and you collectively decide on one behavior that exemplifies that value in that format of conversation. It's very simple, very radical, and very playful, which also creates a safeguard to collective ego and therefore taking things defensively and therefore dysfunctional conflicts. So you can use a value rule, for example, by saying, when you're having intercultural teams, you can create a value rule around unconscious cognitive bias. Okay, unconscious cognitive bias comes from also the hardwired programs that we have in our head. Like from childhood, we're taught that listening equals obeying. That's a hardwired circuit that's been reinforced by generations of teachers and parents who generally say, you don't listen to me, when they say to their child, you don't obey me. Therefore, you grow up with a hard wiring that connects obeyingness and empathy. Therefore, we conditioned by almost like nurture to constantly not be willing to empathize and listen, because we are hardwired to want to have to obey and agree with that person when we might not want to. So there's a natural inbuilt resistance to empathy through these kind of hard wirings. You can build a value rule that basically short circuits that collectively by just voicing the elephant, Maria, in that particular behavior. So let's say it's your CEO. You could create a value rule about cognitive bias by saying, the logical fallacies. Oh, by the way, here's the infographic online. There's the 20 most common logical fallacies. Me as a CEO, I'm trying to do a better job of being logical. I grew up doing different types of artistic endeavors, and I'm not so comfortable with being always. So if I come up to you collectively and I ask for feedback on my decision making, if anybody detects a logical fallacy, by the way, there's AIs doing that nowadays. Please just voice it kindly to me. This is complete and utter nonsense what I'm telling you, but it's an example of how you can playfully take any value that's corporate, attach a behavior that collectively makes sense for that group in that context. And that's something we've been testing for years, but I don't have one ready-made that necessarily would work other than the thumbs voting, which could help Dennis. That's a value rule as well. That's like the 3 thumbs voting. But does that bring more clarity, Ashish?
Yes, Esteve, it absolutely does. And just to give example of General Mills, uh, there are values, there are guiding principles, but eventually it boils down to two things. Number one, doing the right thing all the time, correct? So it talks about integrity. And secondly, winning together as a team. So these two are of paramount importance, and that is how we try to conduct our business meetings. Also, the art of listening is also very important. I was in one of the trainings of Dale Carnegie. It was impactful communication within India, and through the session, it was a 3 day session, and eventually, after the session ended, I gave a feedback to my HR department as well as to the Dale Carnegie trainer. Let's have a separate module within this impactful communication training on listening skills, because it's also very important, because all we talk about is stage presence, presentations, PowerPoint slides, communication, those things, but even listening is a very important part of communication skills. And then one of our team members within India, he drove a beautiful session just talking about listening skills. Us.
Us.
Awesome.
Us.
I think that's a very big one. There's so much communication that I see that basically boils down by the receivers being too busy to receive the notification, not the notification, the information.
Us.
Us.
I think, Tuomo, it's now time for your round of investigative questioning or insights, whatever it is that you choose. What would you like to share about your scan?
Yeah, on my scan, that was very interesting to do. And as I started to investigate personally those results and how they reflect, I was a little bit horrified that there is so much for me to learn. That how can I align myself, and how much there is for me to learn. One thing that surprised me was that the key behavior was so much in red area, so in hosting area. That was a very surprise for me. That I do presencing, I can't take care of the others. I hear that, listen to others, try to listen genuinely, try to take the time, try to slow myself down. But based upon my answers, it looks like I'm doing the hosting and managing the others and generating being the host. And that was a little bit surprising for me. One thing that I was aware that big challenge for me is in the expressing the elephant and action audit that I have sort of understood that providing saying the obvious things out loud, that's a challenge for me, and that is something that I need to practice somehow, one way or another. So those are the biggest, the hosting part and the elephant part. So those are the things that how could I improve myself, bringing the pointing the elephant out.
Os. Thank you. I could actually then react on this one more. Is the green? Well, it basically comes back to the green, blue, red model that we were talking about earlier. So being green, and the thing about hosting, I just wanted to add on your data is that we're measuring hosting. It's one of those questions that you probably wondered, like, oh my goodness, he's asking the same question again. But it's not. It's actually control questions where they are basically they're congruence checks. So in other words, you got a hosting aspect in how you approach your intentionality of communication. So in other words, how much you align those three levels. Because when we talk, generally what happens is that people are only really focusing on the verbal. So it means that we're getting basically 80% signal loss in cognitive transfer, really. If you go quite literally, we're missing a lot. We're not really, most people are not active listening, they're passive listening, and they're filtering through their cognitive bias, plus they're just focusing on the verbal, which means that they're getting, if you look at that Albert Mehabian's work, we're getting less than 20% of what is really going on if we focus only on the verbal, because most of it comes through the non-verbal and intentions expressed. So if you're horrified, let me just reassure you, maybe I don't need to reassure you, but it is actually very much the case for everybody to be looking at this and going, oh my God, there's a whole universe of things right there that I didn't pay attention to, that might be not playing in my favor. And that's normal because we're just not trained to do that. In schools, we're taught pretty much only the verbal. And unless you're a stage performer of some kind or a public persona, you very rarely even study the non-verbals, and intention is a big nebulous unknown. So really the simple thing here is to just start from looking at the intentions behind every single interaction that you choose to do. And that's not possible all the time, but there's moments when you want to do that are called micro habits. So it might just be that in your situation, starting from a simple micro habit where autopilot comes off when I notice this, and then you create yourself an intention that aligns with how you talk. For example, you could use an accusation audit in the trigger of a conflict. So rather than try and sort of become a Jedi of communication by learning everything there is to learn in a few hours, which is not possible, you can also just go into, okay, I'm going to now do a micro change about conflicts because that was one of your most challenging situations. And it's also the case also for others in this group. So conflict is a massive issue because we don't necessarily understand what really is a conflict until it becomes a problem in our minds, become interference, a loss of energy, a source of anxiety or stress. But often upstream from that comes an opportunity that we've missed. You know, if we have a devil's advocate in the group like Maria, sometimes the elephant opens up an opportunity rather than a problem, a creative opportunity. And that's where conflicts can be resolved, is when we take that almost devil's advocate elephant in the room role and open up something when it's needed at the right time that builds trust. So a couple of elements came out from what you said to me. One was that hosting, are we using the same meaning? Because some people use the word hosting to describe only process focus. Others use the word quite widely and say hosting when it's basically, you know, hosting an event, like the whole tech, everything. Like slush hosting would be much more than just the DJ who's hosting the conversation. It's all the tech and everything. So at what level are you thinking of the word hosting?
In this sense, I'm thinking pretty much not everything in not the technicals, but hosting the environment, people, and having the conversation understood on both sides as well as me, and having done quite a lot of solution sales and working with the owners of the companies, I really want to find out their intentions and what's driving them. So getting to understand the hidden or unknown needs that there is with the participants.
So in a way, I forgot to wait for the os. Was that os?
Sorry, os. Yes.
So we're just still practicing this rule. It's a new one for us. As a board member, as a chairman in particular of the board, you are one of the roles that on paper has the biggest legitimacy for hosting. Like, it's very hard to sometimes get the legitimacy for hosting in cross-functional teams, particularly in multicultural teams. I found, Ashish, that it's really hard for some cultures to accept an even role of a host. Some people resist the even idea of a host. Like in Scandinavian companies, there's a lot of flat hierarchies which automatically label a host as potentially unwelcome even before you even start. So, but in the role of a board member, it's already built into the DNA of the role that you are kind of, in a way, a host for that. And if you're a long-term host, if you're chairman of the board, then you're going to be doing stewardship as well as hosting, which was the word you used there. So I think if we talk about this in the context of board member, you with the hat of a board member, steward, and host, then basically what you're asking about is hosting conflicts, because negotiations and conflicts and discussions are all intertwined. It's very hard to have a really great conversation that's discussive without having some different mini conflicts happening. So they're kind of part of the same bundle. So would it be useful right now for me to talk a bit more about conflicts? Anna, what do you think? Or do you have a better idea, since you're following this from a more rational perspective? Should we talk about conflicts, or would you like to explore this a bit further from your side, Tuomo?
I could mention a few words about the conflicts, that as being a board director or chairman of the board, that typically there is these conflicts, that there are different interests from different people and different owners, that some are focusing on that, having a sort of a short-term targets on a company, personal benefits. Some are focusing more on a people who they employ, maybe even long-term growth, and some are just focusing on themselves. Unfortunately, it's fine for some companies. That's okay. I don't mind, but having to understand these and balance with these, that there is a many times there is a conflict that I need to somehow address and understand, and well, facilitate host being a stewarding. So it's yeah, having this kind of role. Yeah, you should. And sometimes I don't like to push the sort of ordering more approach, that we have to order or even vote or anything like that. That I would like to have this discussion held so that different voices could be heard, understood, and agreed on a common basis.
How transparent are these different interests?
Most of the time, in the beginning of, for example, if I go to a new place, they are quite, they are not necessarily known. That the owners do not know that what they want or why they are doing, what's their purpose, why they have established the company. It's very often those are obscure, hidden, unknown, or not even discussed. That okay, we have a new company, we are doing sort of okay, and we then can proceed. But when there is a conflict or problem with the financial issues, then these need to be discussed, understood, and in bigger strategic leaps, that what should be the direction. Then it's crucial to understand these needs. Oh, well, not crucial, but helpful, definitely. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
In a way, the whole topic is actually back to D. Hock's work on the importance of purpose. Like if you bring in a group of founders, different leaders, C-level leaders together who are, in a way supposedly aligned by just working together, but they're not necessarily so when you discover what they're really up to, and they're more focused on operations sometimes than the actual alignment of the bigger whys, then it becomes in a way interesting question of responsibility of, is it the board's responsibility to invite that? I would say it probably is, but others might disagree. But in a way, you do have the legitimacy to sort of invite with purpose, and in other words, give them homework, because when somebody turns up, no matter how senior they are, without preparation, it's usually pretty mediocre, because humans do need to prepare. So even if you've got a very high profile CEO who's really busy, if you invite as a board, for example, with a chaotic invitation that gives them clear time buckets to say, Jonathan, you're going to be preparing. You see, Ashish, I just proved your point, cognitive bias. I used a leader as a Jonathan. I could have used Ashish or Amina as an example, right? So I'm also on a cognitive bias pathway. But you see what I'm saying is that you could actually invite with a chaotic agenda. I did a whole series on this last month because of the startup world struggling with this very topic, is that if we don't invite with purpose, how do we expect people to actually work with collective intelligence in a meeting if it's not hosted, not invited? I don't know how you do the invites. You probably already have structured invitation processes. However, within those, how much emphasis is on the time bucketing and roles and accountabilities? And I'm using the word accountability, not responsibility on purpose. And how does that accountability carry through in terms of penalties or consequences? Because when there are no penalties or consequences, it's like a license for everybody to just pay attention if it's interesting. But if you're accountable and that you have a consequence that's potentially negative, not necessarily punitive, but negative to somebody not complying to your rules, then when there's no consequences, that behavior also speaks on your communication. You're basically then given a mixed message of, it matters in my words, but in my behaviors as a host, I'm not following through, so why should they bother? In other words, if I was a teenager kind of attitude, more personal oriented, more narcissistic, more prone to focusing on my own immediate present needs, I'm very likely to use that as an opportunity to not do my preparation, not turn up on time, not really contribute to the collective intelligence, and certainly not tame my ego. So that kind of, it's up to the host really to not, I wouldn't say police, but at least create a safe space where the inclusiveness, the psychological safety are all voiced out loud as elephants and not just as afterthoughts when somebody misbehaves, because then it becomes conflictual. So that means value rules, that means clear roles, that means who's hosting and why are we doing this and who's doing what and who's preparing what. All these kind of very simple, what you would expect from a normal working corporate team to do in a normal traditional corporation, but in a board setting, for example, would probably help some to just, when you ask them to come and say what's their personal passion for joining this startup, that they would actually have done a bit of thinking about their personal values and see how much their company's DNA is actually a reflection of their own personal values, and realize that, is that really what I want? Kind of ethical questions can be asked. That's kind of a board member. You could be legitimate to ask them ethical questions as well, through GDPR compliance, if you're talking data, for example. So I don't know, how does this, do you want to react to this? Because I kind of brought more questions perhaps to your mind.
Yeah, as mentioned, there is clear needs that I can use and adapt, and having to. It's always difficult to have these in the beginning, and it's gradual process that it would be great to have in the first meeting all the answers ready. But of course, it's my responsibility and my accountability also to do the background research and dig in and ask questions as well.
I think one interesting thing that I hear of this, and we have this kind of problems in my organization a lot, that we don't have people kind of following the rules or leading it. Like if you elect artificially some leader to perform a certain role, that it was hard to make people follow along. And I'm curious how you could, the way we solved it was that we basically started rotating the roles and these responsibilities, so that everyone kind of builds a sort of compassion for having a certain role, of keeping a certain structure. And that had a very positive effect overall, because first of all, everyone is familiar with the work that goes into the preparation of certain meetings and so on. But it also increases the participation, the empathy for when someone is called out. And I think the point here is also, Estève, you're asking about like a consequence, not a punishment. And I think that is one thing that can happen, right? Like you're not, let's say, participating well, like maybe next time you can run this meeting. This is not necessarily a punishment, but it enables you to show how it's done, right? And I don't know how much this translates into a boardroom where you have very clearly defined roles and responsibilities, but it would be something that I would love to hear if you figure out how to try it out. Rotating roles. Us.
I'm
Steve,
gonna
I'd
just
like to share my experience since we were discussing about conflict.
thank
So,
you.
Tomo's vast experience of as an investor and the boardrooms, also Maria's, and maybe now Dennis and my experience through the corporate world. Conflicts, they are a day-to-day happenings. It's part of new human nature, correct? Especially coming with cross-functional teams, having sometimes opposing KPIs and objectives. So maybe finance wants to have a tighter control on the budget versus supply chain. For them, customer service is more important. So they might want to spend extra buck in terms of less than truckload transportation, speed deliveries, just to ensure that the customers' orders are fulfilled. When I went through my result of satellite scan and I saw the team needs, this has been beautifully put. We always heard about team building, forming, storming, norming, and performing. And what Green Elephant is added is a journey. And for me, the fourth step, performing. Uh, so productivity, autonomy, and results. Host as a facilitator. So this is where my strength is. This has been highlighted, and I do agree to this assessment. So it's an eye opener for me. So that is one part. While we are discussing about conflicts, another is going to be, and it's a day-to-day occurrence with a large organization, a 150 years old company, so many employees starting with General Mills in the career, working for 40 years. It's very common to find people retiring after 40 years. We have got a whole different set of team members. So there can be iGens, millennials, Gen X, boomers, and many times conflict happens due to this generational differences. So boomers are people who arrive early, leave late. They love meetings and conference call. And as far as iGen is concerned, they like customized work schedule. They are expressive. They seek information, and also they like uh, being acknowledged with personalized rewards, as compared to boomers who want job stability. So many times, when in a cross-functional and a cross-cultural team setup, there is a generational difference. These conflicts they come up in the picture. I would love to listen more about experience of Maria, Tumo, Steve, and Dennis. Have you come across, and how does our communication skills help us to cope with that? Us.
Os.
Awesome.
Us.
Was that a question for me or?
Anybody is
everyone.
welcome to take that. I just left the silence to see if anybody wanted to pick up the talking piece.
No, not for now. No.
Thank you. I think we're going to go to the final round of questions because we could go deeper into the conflicts, but I'm going to just summarize that before we do the final round, which is the toast. This like what's the idea thing that you'd like to toast? Like could be a superpower actually, since you were using that word. But basically, one thing about conflicts is that you talked about unconscious bias. I was just looking through my notes. Tuomo was talking about conflicts of interest. Dennis was also talking about the legacy of when you have two different ego mergers, like you have a team with a collective ego, right? So you have team A with their own brand and history and legacy, and team B, and they both have an attachment to their collective ego, which is kind of their corporate brand. So underlying all of these conflicts, there is the identity question of who is talking. I like to say this to teenagers when I'm playing around with them, saying, who do you think you are? But without any aggression in the voice. But that's really the question, is who's talking? Is it the role of the CEO? Is it the role of a host who has the legitimacy to interrupt a meeting for the sake of collective intelligence? Or is it me and my personal short-term interest of me because I just want to get what I want? Who's talking? And generally, when you start clarifying that question, you find that there's two sort of like, that's what you measured in the scan about the conflicts, is that you've got the good conflicts and the bad conflicts. The constructive, or what we call functional conflicts, are basically when you can detach from the personal short-term immediate ego needs. So For example, a conflict mediator then says, I understand that I have my needs, but right now let's focus on your needs, which is like the ultimate mediation posture, is focusing on needs, not on feelings. Behind a feeling is always a need, right? So basically, if you look into NVC, you find the whole framework of facts then leads to feelings, then flags to needs, then you can negotiate requests. Now, in a conflict, the minute a person takes a posture of personal, I take things personally, I have an ego trigger about any topic, gender, that becomes dysfunctional, destroys trust. You stay stuck in the first stage of team building, which is stage 1, and you never get anywhere. It's just a collection of people who don't really form a team. And then when you start building trust, you start moving on that journey that Ashish mentioned, by going through a storming, conflictual phase, and then norming, adjustment to process, performing high performance teams, and then adjourning, which is disintegrating into the next team. That only becomes possible when people are able to go into collectively intelligent conflicts, which are called functional, which is basically what creative processes are all about. So anytime you've got a tension, you can choose between making it dysfunctional, which is destroying trust, or functional, which is appealing to innovative, creative thinking in collective intelligence. IDEO does that with brainstorming. Lean methodologies do that with their own chaotic processes. Everybody has their own way of doing it, but it's basically an invitation to go through that uncomfortable conversation of a conflict, but only focusing on the roles and the accountabilities, the task and the process, nothing personal. And once people are able to separate themselves from their personal ego enough, then you get this safe space, which allows people to go through the conflicts. That's generally, without me doodling it, the sort of summary of how I understood where you were talking about. So getting people through stage 2, the stage of conflicts, means that somebody as a host has got to create a safe space to get people away from their egos by value rules or other means, and making, for example, using the ego hats in rotation that Dennis suggested, is an excellent strategy because it forces everybody to detach themselves from that rotating. In your case of a board trauma, you might not want to do that with the stewardship or the harvesting, but you might want to consider doing that with the hosting, or then switch just one of those two, like just the harvesting. You get each participant, if they're misbehaving as a consequence, you give them the harvest for the next meeting, for example. It's not as big as hosting, but it still gives them a sort of rotating, and it also does a detachment from ego, which creates the potential for non-toxic conflicts or positive creative conflicts to occur, and builds you through the stages of high-performing teams. So in other words, it becomes a team building without having to do, squats together. You can actually do team building by just using conversation in the right way. So that's kind of where I was taking the whole conflict versus creativity. I don't know if this is adding any perspective to what you had, but we could have 1 or 2 reflections before we do the checkout question, which is going to be, what are you toasting? What idea, mental model, book, person, whatever, be toasting? Anybody want to react to this before we go for the final checkout?
So, Steve, just a quick 1 minute. So, sharing my experience, you talked about hats. So, we have, used regularly the 6 thinking hats, and also being trained upon emotional intelligence. So, those 2 tools or trainings, they help a lot in professional life. Us.
Us.
Os. I can go next. Using humor maybe in not in like a humorous or making fun of, but using humor is something that not in all conflicts, but let's say in order to lighten it up is something that I do, and I'm going to start practicing more how to use humor in those situations, and also looking at then what's the intention, because the intention, there might be like a cynicality behind, especially if you're in finance and controlling and looking at legal matters, that nobody's following the rules anyway, so why am I doing this? And so take the cynicality away and from the intention of it, and then also who is speaking, because is it the ego? Am I am I in an ego stance when I'm doing this, because then it's going to be personal. I had a very low ego score on that day when I did this. I was only a 2, but it was surprisingly low, I would say. I wasn't expecting that. So, Os.
Os. Thank you for sharing, Maria.
You're welcome.
Okay, we had, by the way, a low score on ego is generally very good news, because it means that you are able to detach, and that's basically what humor is doing. Humor is a way, like theater, if you look at it, it's like looking at a mask. From you play a mask, you change the mask, and you go like, it's not me, it's my mask. So a part of me is angry, is different than I'm angry. And that whole distanciation is the way to do emotional management, as probably you've been finding, Ashish, with emotional intelligence trainings. It's a lot about sort of repositioning who's talking, like, is it me, or is it just a part of me there's a part of me that's feeling anger. Is quite different, because your voice in it is external, and you have dominion over it, instead of saying I'm angry, I identify. So that spaciousness comes from a low score. So having a low ego score, like basically, if you have a conflict mediator doing the scan, I'm looking at any scores between 3 mean that they can do conflict mediation. Otherwise, they are likely to be part of the problem when they try and mediate. And so it's kind of a good thing to have a low score on ego, because it's an indirect measure of your ability to distance yourself through either humor or other means. Okay, so yeah, it's probably one of your superpowers. Maybe you would be a mediator and you already do that. So in a sense, now we could do a toast. A toast would be just something that you would like to collectively share to the world, because this is recorded, obviously. So there'll be further shares. Something that you think is worth sharing forward. It doesn't have to be about us or you. It could just be something that you've encountered. I have a pretty good idea of who I'm going to toast tonight after what I've been watching on YouTube today. But who would like to go first?
I think I can give it a try. So I think one of the things that I want to empathize or emphasize about this, sorry, long day, is that we want to be, like, everything we do, I think at some level comes about us being happy or striving to be happy. We want to be happy at work. We want to be proud of the things we do every day. We want to communicate to make other people in some form or another happy. And I think this point that Maria made about like finding the humor in things and seeing things lightly, like, it resonates a lot with me, because I see, as things get very serious, that's one of the first things that goes out the second you're stressed out. Like, you are not able to detach. And I think when you catch yourself and say, like, okay, this is not so serious, let's remember why we're all here, that we're all doing this in order to accomplish good things for everyone, then all of a sudden it feels lighter, it's easier to do, and it's just better overall. And I think that is also what I want to toast, in a way, is that when we really take a step back and look at ourselves, we should be very, very grateful for that. The thing that we can think about is how to communicate better. We don't have, like, we have food on the table, we're healthy enough for today, and we are, like, have the mind space to think, like, how to make our life and the life of the people we interact with every day more enjoyable and better. And I think that's something to be very grateful for every day, that I think gets lost in the conflicts that we go through every day. And that is what I want to toast. Os.
I'll drink to that. Thank you, Dennis. Who would like to toast next?
I can toast.
Yeah, you can skip this round.
Yeah. I will toast for Green Elephant, for Estève, Anu, and the team. You are doing a a great job for the planet and for all of us. So,
Thank you.
Us.
Yeah. Who would like to go next?
I would like to raise a toast. So first, my key takeaways. Uh, so satellite scan, it totally gave me a different perspective than the routine psychometric testing that I have had at least 3 to 4 times through my career of 20 years. And also getting those actionable insights. That is very important. So, number one, as a host and harvester, leading meetings for my team and cross functional team, and also addressing my team need as a facilitator for performance. So, these are the clear two actionable points that I've come across from my satellite scan. And apart from my MBTI psychometric testing, these are the two things that I would like to build upon. And I totally agree with the results. I did an introspection after getting the satellite scan, and I said that yes, these are my action items, and I agree to it. So I am toasting to two places right now. One is for Green Elephant, that is Estève and Anu. Thank you so much for having me and this wonderful panel. It was really a wonderful opportunity. And secondly, to great companies like General Mills. This is my second stint with General Mills, and it's a great place to work where training and development and all-round development and also the meetings being heard, a safe place to voice your opinions, diversity and inclusion. So these are the two things: Green Elephant and General Mills. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. I'll toast to that.
Oh,
Any last toast before we end the session for today?
Yeah, I would like to make a toast for the curious people who like to learn more of themselves, understanding the communication and each other better, and in that way making companies, workplaces better place, and maybe even eventually world a better place. So I personally this making this uh, scan was a eye opener. It was a sort of a I have been focusing quite much on others, and now I realized, as mentioned, that there is so much I can develop in myself and focus a little bit, turn focus on myself and personal development in order to understand others. So I toast for this opportunity. Us.
Us.
yes.
I'll toast to that as well. Thank you so much, all of you. So there is something else behind the scan that is not yet complete, which is something that we're building at the moment, which is about micro habits. So you probably saw at the end of your dashboards, there was a little explanation about how to build a micro habit. And in the first video, there's an opening about that in a very basic, general way. But I invite you all to think about just creating yourself a really simple habit around one thing, either conflicts or negotiation, perhaps, that you just start using and playing with. It doesn't have to be something, because we can talk very metaphysically here. We can talk very metacognitively and generally and theoretically. But the way to start being kind, with other human beings, which is free, is to start with one tiny little habit shift. For example, for me, I did one about assumptions. Every time I get in a conflict in my head, what is the assumption being made that I haven't checked? I do this mental check through. I have a taxonomy of things that I usually miss, and I just go quick check. Okay, this person, did you? And then I ask a calibrated question to just check it, and I say my intention by doing so. I say my intention just to respect that I didn't misunderstand. I'm quite prone, humor on myself, to making the wrong assumptions quickly. I'm a bit bored often and just jump straight in. Sorry, but is it true that? And then check. So using humor, actually, is actually one of my first micro habits is using humor to check my assumptions in conflictual situations. It's been working so far quite nicely, because even in awkward multicultural gaps, people have just giggled, and then we tackle the thing and move on. So That was one example of a micro habit. You can do more, and we can have a one-on-one and chat together and build one if you want, if you're struggling with the data as it is now. But this is for today, a great way to finish. And thank you so much for being in whatever time zone you were joining tonight. And it's really nice to hear also you just talking real and not trying to sort of, be in a secondary ego hat, but just being you. So thank you as well for that. And I hope for those of you in the chat that this has been insightful for you as well. We'll be streaming again next Tuesday. Not the next Tuesday, the one after, sorry, because we're taking 1 week break. I'm actually taking a holiday. And then after that, we come back on the 6th, where we will be doing the same thing with 4 other people who've been testing and unboxing the satellite scan as it is now. So thank you very much. Good night. I invite you to stay behind after I end the stream. We can do a little checkout. Good night.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Os.
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 Pause.